Good morning. It's Sunday, the 25th of February. At least I hope it is. If it is, and it's 11 o'clock, then we're definitely live. Welcome to the Expat Show for expats in Germany. Hello, I'm Barry Redfern, and also today, let's introduce Alicia Banfield. Good morning.
Good morning, Barry, and everyone out there.
And Scott Hazlitt.
Hi there.
That was very short.
He hasn't quite woken up yet.
All right. Well, we'll get back to him later. And in Bavaria, we hope we've got Andrew Bossum. Hello, Andrew.
Yes, hello. And just for a change, I am unscripted and unrehearsed.
Yeah, just like the rest of us here then.
Completely.
And hopefully also today, catching up with the news, will be John Goodyear in Britain. I hope he's there. Can he hear us?
Hello, Barry. I can hear you loud and clear, and welcome from the banks of the River Severn in somewhat chilly yet sunny Ironbridge in Shropshire. And this is where I'll be reporting in half an hour's time on some of the news that's made the headlines both in Germany and over here in the UK.
Thank you very much, John. And today we're going to sort out the world. Well, we always do, but we really are going to do it today. We're going to sort out the world, and you can join in too with some live chat, I hope, by clicking on our YouTube stream.
Hold on, girl, now wait just a minute. I've got something to say, you should hear it. Oh, I'm happy to make time for your feelings. You have to admit, I already do. Let's just break it down to you and me uptown, dancing all around till the disco ball pops. But I have to be me, and everyone can see your anger is misplaced. And I'm gonna tell ya, don't hate me 'cause I get attention. Don't turn me into what I'm not. I have to be me 24/7, and I ain't never gonna stop. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. Oh, no, no, no. No, oh, oh, oh. And I ain't never gonna stop. Come on, listen to me. I've tried so many times to tell you this is as good as I can be. Why isn't it enough to be faithful and also be the hit of the party? Let's just break it down to you and me uptown, dancing all around till the disco ball pops. But I have to be me, and everyone can see your anger is misplaced. And I'm gonna tell you, don't hate me 'cause I get attention. Don't turn me into what I'm not. I have to be me 24/7, and I ain't never gonna stop. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. Never gonna stop. No, 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 no. Yeah, 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 yeah. I ain't never gonna stop. No, no. Oh, I ain't never gonna stop. I ain't never gonna stop now, baby. Never gonna stop now, baby. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's 5 minutes past 11 if you're listening in Germany, and you're listening to the Expat Show. So, Alicia, you're actually a qualified doctor, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
So you can give some advice then about the flu that's been gripping, and that's the appropriate word, isn't it?
Yeah, gripping.
In Germany.
Yeah,
I've never heard a bilingual dad joke before.
No, but now you have.
You have. And we'll be keeping more of those coming, just to keep you on your toes. Yeah, it's one of those things that you kind of, it's a moneymaker for the pharmacology companies and for the pharma industry, but at the same time, it can be so devastating to certain subsections of the population, like the young kids who are not fully immunized yet, and the elderly, the homeless, those with weakened immune systems. But here, it's devastating. I have been sicker here in Germany. I come from the Caribbean. I've been sicker here in Germany in the last 10 years in winter than I ever remember being in any other country. So the joke I told my sister was, I come from the Caribbean, I've never been to Africa, and I came here to Germany to get Ebola. It was a joke, but I felt deathly sick. And a lot of the kids in our neighborhood and a lot of the adults are getting really ill with this horrible flu. So from this year, my husband and I talked about it, and we think we're going to actually start getting the flu virus. The flu vaccine. Yeah, getting the flu virus. We're going to start getting about it.
Yeah, both of them are free.
Yeah, exactly. Anyone else out there gets their annual flu?
What about you? What about you, Andrew? Because I gather your family has actually suffered from this.
Well, I think so. I mean, the doctor didn't actually call it flu. She said it was a viral infection. Yeah. I mean, I spent about a week or two coughing mostly. Interestingly, I didn't get any fever, and I didn't have very much nausea either. I'm not sure, but anyway, I spent about a week not really being able to do anything because I was coughing so much. I literally pulled a muscle in my back.
That's also a sign of the advancing years when you pull a muscle just coughing.
Oh well, but it was a pretty bad cough. I mean, my wife actually said it sounded like whooping cough. It's that bad.
Yeah,
I've had that.
So I got diagnosed with a viral infection and given a few palliatives and some codeine to help me sleep. That was about it. And then I had, I got a bit better. I'm still coughing now, but I got better enough to work. At which point I had a huge backlog. And so I'm halfway through clearing that, and my wife goes down with it.
That just to throw out a medical jargon, that of that symptom you said that you actually sounded like whooping cough. That's actually called stridor. And when you cough so badly that when you go, that is serious distress. What about you, Scott? Anything this season, or have you stayed healthy?
I'm very fortunate there. I almost never get sick. It didn't used to be that way. I used to have lots of problems with my sinuses, but I have a doctor who does homeopathy here, and he discovered that I have some kind of an allergy. So he said, use this citric acid extract, and it's this oil, and excuse me when I say it this way, but I smear it on a Q-tip in my nostril in the morning and evening. And since I've been doing that, I get a little bit of a cough once a year, but that's it.
Really?
So I'm really lucky there.
I know there are lots of mainstream medical people out there who are very skeptical about homeopathy and acupuncture and what's not. My take on it actually is, if it works, don't knock it. Acupuncture has actually been around, longer than
thousands of years.
Longer than what we now accept as modern medicine. And it works. What I find absolutely excellent here in Germany is that it is among the population. It's integrated as part of healthcare, these Heilpraxis. And I think it's wonderful because it's more open-minded. And it allows the population to learn and not be so close-minded. I've considered having acupuncture. I've had a little bit of a back cracking before in the past. And me and physiotherapy and massage, Reiki massage, deep lymph massage, are very good friends.
Mm-hmm.
But homeopathy I haven't tried yet. What about you, John? Oh, John's off. Okay.
No, John will be joining us again at about 11:30.
So let's ask Barry. Barry, what about you and the health issues?
Oh, well, I'm retired now, and
which means you have lots of time to think about your aches and pains.
I have a block booking, with the arts.
But may I say, you look wonderfully healthy.
Yes, you're looking younger than ever.
Oh, thank you. You can come again.
We're buttering him up.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think, though, that you can go into the doctors with one problem and come out with two more.
Be very skeptical. Yeah. I even when I was practicing, I used to say, doctors make you sick. They do. And hospitals should be avoided at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, though, Germans and Germany, they're very health aware. And what I love here in Germany is that preventive medicine. Insurance companies will actually pay for your annual TÜV, where you go and you get your top to toe, which may seem like a standard thing and common sense here in Germany, and I like that. But in other countries, insurance companies, they don't care about your prevention. They're only there to jump in when you get sick, and they can say, oh, we're not paying for that.
Right.
Exactly. But here, despite it's this very strange dichotomy. I think they eat pork like there's nothing going out of style.
That's right.
And smoke at an abominable rate. But on the other hand, they're out, they're walking their dogs, they're embracing homeopathy and Heilpraxis, and I think it's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, I think in Germany, people are more health conscious and diet conscious than in many other European countries.
Yeah, and lifestyle. From my background, I would say there's more an awareness of public health issues, although people who are not familiar with the field wouldn't understand. But it's basic preventive care, understanding what in your environment actually promotes good health and moving towards that in a move to prevent getting sick in the first place.
You mentioned this.
I mean, I think it's not just a sort of a public awareness thing. Also, because health insurance companies generally can't just simply say, "Oh no, we're not going to pay for this. We're not going to pay for that." There are all sorts of things that they have to pay for, which means that it's actually in their interests
to pay for
to make sure that that people get their checkups and don't get sick in the first place.
Which actually, Andrew, when you think about it, is basic common sense. You would figure that it's a very practical, common sense way to go. But we've lived in the United States of America, and actually what's common sense here is not common sense there. There, if you say you're going to a doctor for a checkup and you look to your insurance company to pay for it, it's not covered, is it?
No. Or I don't have insurance. Oh.
Yeah. Preventive medicine is not covered in
this test that you mentioned, Alicia, what does it include?
Which
the so-called tough of medicine here in Germany.
The tough. Basically, when we go to the doctor, they listen to your chest, check your heart, blood pressure, the usual. Take your blood, and they're screening it for your cholesterol, your HDLs, your LDLs, your liver function tests, your C-reactive protein, and all the cardiac indications. Do a urine test, see if you've got any calcium. There, for men, I think they may screen for prostate antibodies to see, which is an early indication of what's going on in your prostate. And then, to be a little gross, they even will screen for colon contents, stool screening, which is fantastic because colon cancer is a horrible killer simply because it is usually diagnosed so very, very late.
Yeah.
But early on, you have what they call occult blood, which is you don't see it, but it's there. So they do FOC tests, and that's usually the first indication. And I know personally 2 people who they went in for their TUF, and the FOC, which is fecal occult blood, was positive, and they actually found stomach and bowel cancer in the very, very, very early stages, which literally saved their life.
Yeah.
So here, prevention, up front it might be costly, but long term it definitely.
So if it can be detected early on,
Go
then
for it.
bowel cancer can be
And
treated.
for the benefit of any confused expats who might be listening, it's not officially called the TUF.
No, it's not. I should say we call it the TUF. It's a joke in Britain. My mother-in-law, who's British, she actually calls it her MOT.
MOT.
Yeah, but it's that once you hit that golden age of 50 and above, you go in every year. Some people or every 2 years, and you just get, it's a nice little top to toe check, make sure everything is good, because whether you like it or not, no matter how healthy a lifestyle, the older you get, the more there is that can and will go wrong.
We had a small problem when we were building this house, and our tiler tiled most of it, and he was going to come back later and do some more. But he went into hospital, and they found, and nobody had found this before. He couldn't even see it, and yet he had a tumor the size of a football in his stomach.
Yeah.
Luckily, it was benign, and they got it out. But of course, he's retirement age now, so he's not going to go back to work. But he went on, and he started, because his daughter had been taking piano lessons. And so he decided he was going to learn to play the piano as well. And he gave a concert in a church.
Excellent.
It was pretty good, apparently.
Yeah. It's there. Unfortunately, there are some cancers that are detected late simply because of where they are. For example, like pancreatic cancer, stomach and bowel. And it is because there's so much space for it to grow, and there's so much that the body compensates for. And it's only when the body can no longer compensate and it starts, and growing tumors start squeezing on other stuff, in layman's terms, that people who don't take this preventative screening approach get diagnosed. So, for that, I give a German healthcare system 2 resounding thumbs up. Good approach.
Just going back to the flu, I see that there's between 30 and 40% of the elderly are having vaccinations for the flu. Is that a good idea?
For that age group, I would say yes, because once again, the older you get, the more you are prone to get different diseases, and everything starts to age, even your immune system. And then also, a lot of the elderly, they're living alone, they're on limited incomes sometimes. And unfortunately, I must say, I don't know if it's as bad here as it is in the UK. One of the things they tend to skimp on in the winter is the heating. They'll put on 4 layers of clothes, but keep the heating down because it's so expensive. But unfortunately, that chill in the air, living with it, sleeping in it, it is not good for the immune system, and they are more. So I think it is a good idea for the elderly to get their flu shots. It's good.
Okay. Well, we'll continue a little bit more, if we may, about medicine in Germany in just a few moments. It's 23 minutes past 11, and we're live with the Expat Show for expats in Germany. I'm Barry Redfern. In the studio, we've got Alicia Banfield, Scott Haslett. In Bavaria, Andrew Bossum, and joining us just a little later on will be John Goodyear, who's over in Britain to bring us some news from there. So I was talking to Alicia just a moment ago, because Alicia is a doctor, actually.
Apparently
not a practicing doctor.
Not
at the
practicing
moment,
here, but I still have a lot to do with medicine and healthcare, because oddly enough, even though before I was singing the praises of the German health system, there is that section of German healthcare professionals who want to improve their English for two reasons. One, either they want to move to and work in an English-speaking country, or because English is now the lingua franca of so many professions: business, law, medicine. Right. So yes, I'm still very much in there, and you have to know the technical language and what's current and what's up. So not with the stethoscope in my head, pressing it to people's chests, but yeah, I'm still in there.
How many doctors in Germany, proportion of doctors, medics in Germany, do you think speak English? Or
some part of English, some level of English. It actually depends geographically on where you are. Because, for example, here we're in the north. It is traditionally more a rural setting. Their thinking, their approach is very much more localized, and so their level of English is not as high. But once you go to the south, down by Andrew, I am sure if you walk into the average doctor's office, there is probably a 50% chance or a little bit more that you can present your complaints in English and they'll be able to muddle through. Who's up to the C1 level or B2 plus level of English needed to work in an English-speaking country, that's another thing. But being able to communicate your basics in English, I think here in Germany, it depends on the area. Mm-hmm.
Well, we've got the experts with us today because in Bavaria, Andrew, you're a specialist. You teach English, don't you?
I do teach English.
Amongst
yes.
other things, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
sorry, did you want to ask me a question?
I did indeed. I thought you would jump in there and mention about people being able to speak English and how much English is in demand in your region.
Oh yeah, I thought Alicia was doing very well.
But I was talking about, I do what Fach English for medicine.
Specialist, yeah.
General English or English for other specialties, I must admit, I'm less au fait with.
I mean, I do have a couple of dentists as clients, but they're not actually learning English
for practice,
to communicate with patients, for their own personal thing. On a general thing, but sort of getting by on English in Germany, people's experiences vary. Some people say it's absolutely no problem. Everybody speaks English. A lot of people actually complain that they'll ask a question in German and the German they're talking to will very helpfully reply in English, but they're trying to practice their German. Whereas other people say that absolutely nobody they meet speaks any English at all.
I think definitely it depends on the region. I remember even now, I walk into some places, and for those listening who don't realize, I'm actually black. I walk into some places, they see me, and their faces just freeze because they think I'm going to come at them in English. And when I speak German to them, the relief on their face is almost comical. But then if I have friends, of course, who are lawyers, for example, and there is also this stigma associated in a positive way with speaking English. So I'd meet his friends and I would go, oh, by the way, do you speak English? And there's this, of course I do, with this almost, casual arrogance for professionals. But amongst lay people, the average people in this region, it should not be assumed that they like the opportunity to speak English, to practice and maybe learn a word or two. But
I think it's as a general rule of thumb, it's you can probably safely bet that anybody who's had a university education will speak some English.
yeah.
And it's an age question as well, too. The younger people are, because they get it in school, and older people didn't have it.
Yeah.
So that's more of a trend, too, as well.
And actually, with the younger kids, I will tell you, I also had a lot to do with Nachhilfe before I went into this Fach English branch. It's because they listen to pop music, and they're on Facebook and YouTube. They pick up a lot of slang, and they actually learn English so well from pop music that actually in classes where I work and have worked in the past, you use pop music to help teach them English, because for them it's interesting, they pay attention and don't fall asleep.
Well, one advantage of living in this area where we produce the program from is that it's good for learning German, because you're thrown into a situation and you're not too frightened about making mistakes, because there is no alternative.
It's
You have to
baptism
make a
by-
try.
It's baptism
an
by
attempt.
fire.
Yeah.
Well, this is the principle behind total immersion. And also, I think a few months ago, there was a study which concluded that it is actually true what teachers and students say, which is that it becomes much easier to speak a foreign language after a couple of glasses of wine.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
true.
Because the other thing is, well, for two reasons, I think. One, it lowers your inhibitions. And then you don't think so much. But then I think the other element is you don't care.
I was going to say, you just don't care. If you get it wrong, who cares?
Yeah. But
They
of
say,
course,
what's he saying? What's he talking
but
about?
if you
He
have
dropped the wine there,
if
it's
you
fine.
carry on having a few more on top of that, then you get
then
another
you get-
language on top of it. You get an extra one called gibberish.
And everybody speaks gibberish to some degree. Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
It's a universal language.
Well, I don't know if John is online now in England. Let's try. Hello, John Goodyear.
Hello, Barry. Yes, I'm here listening attentively to what you're
Our
talking
wonderful
about.
conversation. Yeah.
And not speaking gibberish. Thank you, John.
You're very welcome, Alicia.
So, what's happening in the UK, John?
Well, there's an awful lot of news happening here. Obviously, it's dominated by Brexit, but we won't go into that too much. But, of course, the big news, not necessarily out of the UK, but it makes the UK media because the UK is so interested in America, is this terrible school shooting, this tragic news of yet another school shooting in the States. And the headlines the day after were sort of shooting in a Florida school, carnage in the classroom with 17 people losing their lives. And the individual who committed this act actually caught. So the debate, of course, in the States, which for us as Europeans, even as Brits, is very difficult to comprehend, to understand, because we don't quite understand this sort of mass usage and mass possession of firearms. So there's this debate of keeping those firearms on the one hand, but then on the other, to look at potentially taking firearms away from people, stop selling those firearms to particular individuals. And I know Scott's there in the studio from
That's
the
right.
States.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, what do you think, Scott?
Well, it's hard for Europeans or people from other countries to understand this because we think, well, look, we get by pretty well without having such liberal firearms laws here. The problem in the States is it's been this way for over 200 years, and everybody can understand, yeah, it used to be when they were out there, they had to watch out for the Indians and the bears and whoever, their neighbors trying to take their land away, so they ought to have a gun. But now the question is not whether we need a gun or not. The question is, it's so intertwined with this idea of freedom in general. And the head of the NRA recently said, which I thought was quite shocking, he said, we have to equate this with if someone changes the Second Amendment in the Constitution, which allows this, says we're going to change this, then they're basically cutting in on your freedoms, your general freedoms as a person. And as soon as you go there with this emotional argumentation, then a lot of people will say, no, well, I don't want anybody to take my freedoms away because that's like the highest good in the United States. Pretty much you can do anything you want as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else, which is very ironic because that's exactly what happens with this gun thing. But people, you see in places like Texas, there are even pastors of churches who teach their members of their congregation how to use a gun to protect themselves because God doesn't want them to get shot by somebody else. And for them, these people are really afraid. That's the thing, and it's always a relative thing. From our standpoint, we say, how often is someone going to walk down the street and shoot you? But there is much more violent crime in the United States, completely apart from whether they have a gun or not.
There's this growing, I find in the States, there's this siege mentality. We're under siege, and it is so deeply embedded in their mind. It's basically a circular cause and effect.
Yeah.
They wheel guns around and then they go, oh, we're under siege. Because they're under siege,
Everyone has a gun.
Everyone has a gun, which means more people use it, which means more people get hurt. And they're caught up in this cycle. And yeah, after 200 years, breaking that cycle is going to be next kin to impossible.
Yeah.
I think that this would become a civil, Americans would go to war over it.
I think it would be difficult, very difficult, but attitudes have changed before. And I think we're probably seeing that beginning to happen. I mean, it probably take a long time, at least a generation.
Yeah.
There's more outcry this time for sure.
Students now, basically standing up and saying, no, we do not want teachers armed. We do not want more and more guns. This has got to stop, and the government's got to do something. And I liken this actually to the civil rights movement back in was it 50s and 60s, Martin Luther King and all the rest of it. You had similarly entrenched ideas about racial segregation, and the civil rights movement came along and changed those attitudes.
They challenged it and go, this is fundamentally wrong.
Well, what about, John, what's the situation in the UK? What do the Brits think about this?
Well, of course, the big debate that we had, it wasn't even a debate, it was just two terrible tragedies. One in the 1980s, for those listeners who were around at the time, in Hungerford, where a man walked through a village and shot people down in cold blood. And then the shocking tragedy of a school in Scotland, in a place called Dunblane, where a crazy man went into a school and shot dead very young children, very similar to the situation in Sandy Hook. And it only took those two scenarios, those two events, that then led the government to pretty much ban all sorts of possession of firearms, with very, very few exceptions. The regulations are so strict, it is said, that even the Olympic rifle team has to go to Germany to practice because our regulations here in the UK are so strict. I've never seen a gun in the UK other than the armed officers that you see at airports and the odd few police officers at train stations nowadays. But it's a sight that you very, very rarely see.
So, Scott, do you think the laws in America will be changed?
Oh, it's quite a struggle now, isn't it? Because you have Trump who says the answer is not to change the gun laws. The answer is to arm
more
people in this dangerous situation. It's going to be a really tough battle. Maybe this time there's more outcry than there has been for a long time. But on the other hand, like I say, the NRA, which pretty much represents the conservative side that doesn't want this to change, they have also mobilized. So it's I'm not very optimistic about it. I think
it'll be status.
I do have a theory about Trump wanting to arm the teachers, which is that he's actually proposing a homeopathic remedy. Because homeopathy is like cures like. Like if your eyes itch, the homeopathic remedy is onion, but it's diluted so much that there's less than one molecule of the active ingredient in a dose. So what Trump wants to do is to ensure that there is less than one gun in every school.
Okay.
Okay.
That's an interesting theory, Andrew.
Yeah, that's a yeah.
I think we'll leave that.
We should. That's right. Let's not go there.
We're letting that
anymore.
sink in and put the pitch. But the argument, I see where Andrew's coming from, and the argument is if these crazies don't know who has the gun, then they're less likely to try another incident like Florida, Columbine, Sandy Hook, and so on.
Oh, boy.
In theory. The question is, will it work?
The problem is, though, that of course they will know exactly who has the guns.
And
the teachers.
They'll take the teachers out
Just
first.
shoot all the
They'll take
teachers
the teachers
first.
out
Right?
first. And the other thing is that when law enforcement arrives, they don't know who to stop. They don't know, they're just seeing people with guns.
Right, that's
How do
true.
they know which ones are the bad guys and which ones are the good guys?
Well, I guess there was a deputy sheriff on the scene who took no action, and
There were about,
he
about
resigned.
6, I think.
Pardon?
There was about 6. It was there were several deputies.
Well,
there.
I guess there was one. At least one of them said he didn't take any action whatsoever.
Wasn't that a security guy?
He was a security. He
guy.
was an ex-deputy sheriff, I guess.
Belonging to the school.
Right, and he didn't. I guess he was just so afraid, which I guess you can probably understand. And he
but
was
he's
so. It was such.
overwhelmed.
There was such a sense of shame that he just immediately resigned and said, But on the other hand, what would he have done? I mean, you think this is my angle on this is the guy who has the gun. He's not afraid to die. And you are. You're thinking, should I shoot him? I don't really want to shoot him. I want to get away, but I want to help people. So you've got this conflict, and you're thinking, I have 2 kids. I've got my husband. And this guy, he's ready to die. He doesn't care. So it's just like if you meet up with a junkie and you say, I'm not giving you my blah, then he just shoots you because he doesn't care. And that's the so you've got a bad set of cards.
Well, moving on now, John.
Yes, so the second story, in fact, it ties into something that Andrew was talking about there with regards to human rights and rights themselves and civil rights. And one of the big stories here in the UK over the last month in particular has been women's emancipation and women getting the right to vote. It's 100 years since the UK gave women the right to vote, and many newspapers, many media outlets ran a huge series on women's suffrage, including one that was very good on Channel 4. And they were supporting the hashtag Vote 100 campaign. And in that context, what's also quite interesting, present day, 100 years on, they have just elected, I say they, the National Farmers Union has just elected their first female president in, wait for it, 110-year history. So a woman by the name of, I did have a name here, but I've seemed to have lost it. But Minia Batters is her name. She has just been elected as the president. She's a farmer. She is an arable farmer, sheep farmer, beef farmer, and has also diversified with regards to making her land available for the catering and the hospitality and the hotel industry. And of course, she's going to be representing 50,000 members, many of whom are going to have huge concerns when it comes to Brexit and when the UK leaves the European Union, particularly with all of the farming regulations that have got to be thought up of our end. So that's another excellent example of a woman getting to the top of the tree.
Well, I was going to just add to that, John, because in our next programme in March, we're going to be looking, among other things, we'll be looking at Brexit and expat fears about their rights, rights they think they might lose. So
this is expats here in Germany or expats in Britain?
Expats in Germany. In actual fact, there is an umbrella organisation looking after the interests of expats throughout the EU. And underneath that, there are various groups in France and the Netherlands, in Germany, who are looking after the interests of expats in those countries. So we'll be talking to some of these people and looking at some of those issues in the March edition of this programme. So, John, Is that it? It was a long piece. Enormous amount of news there.
Yes, well, the other main news, of course, as I said, Barry, it's just dominated here by Brexit. And there's the temptation, of course, to Brexitize absolutely every single programme and channel. But, today we've sort of looked at the school shootings, but the women's rights is a big one. Of course, Theresa May's position here in the UK. A little wobbly at the moment because she's got so many people after a job, but no one wants the poisonous chalice of the prime ministerialship. So I get a sense of a potential leadership campaign with all of the things going on here in the media, but that could be me jumping to conclusions. But I don't think Theresa's position's all that safe. But who wants the job is the big question that's on everyone's lips.
If there's one thing I would like to throw in there with respect to the suffragette movement and rights of women to vote and so on, is I suppose you can call it a child of that, which has been getting a lot of press, but it never quite makes it to the top of the headlines when it comes to the news. And that is something that's been going on for years and even now in modern day, and that is the pay gap. You've got two people doing the exact same job, but when it's a male and a female, the female is paid less. Now, I am here the only woman amongst the men, so I'm going to stir the pot and go, men, why do you think that is?
Because we're better.
Because you're what? Oh, wow.
No.
You just wanted to put your foot in it.
No.
Why? Why do you think that still is? You've got Theresa May, the Prime Minister. You've got Oprah Winfrey, one of the richest women in the world. Ariana Huffington running
Merkel.
one of the...
Well,
Merkel. And yet women, despite all these huge, very prominent women in every day are still getting paid less. I mean, even doctors.
Well, actually, there's been a big controversy in Britain to do with the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, and women were female presenters were discovering that they were paid less than the men.
Yeah.
I actually worked for the BBC many, many years ago. It's where I began my career. And looking back on it all, I think I would reverse the tables. I would say, I would turn the table and say, well...
Let's pay the women more.
No, I would say the men are overpaid.
Yeah. Oh, okay. In other words, they're
paid far too much for presenting.
Well, I think that was the thing, wasn't it? It's the fact that there were so many stories going around about people at the BBC, presenters in particular, earning huge amounts of money, ridiculously huge amounts of money, which basically meant that the BBC eventually decided, okay, let's make it public what we pay these people, and that's how it was revealed that women were getting paid significantly less.
The other thing that the other sector, and I was absolutely appalled at this, even in the NHS. This is how pervasive it is. Even in the NHS, there was a news article that NHS consultants, many consultants on equivalent levels, the male consultants were being paid less than the females.
Oh.
And this is a government agency. So if you've got government agencies who have this culture, well, of course the private sector is going to follow suit. Somebody needs to set an example. Pay should be public. One thing I will say for example, in Barbados, very small country, but public doctors, we are on a government pay scale. And quite frankly, you can walk into the Ministry of Finance, ask for the public pay scale book, I can't remember the official name of it, and look up the salary of everyone. And what it is by salary grade. Not by gender, not by nationality, not by race. Salary grade.
Well, the thing
We're
is,
talking here about very, very big organisations. We're talking about government organisations. This actually trickles down in the UK. I've got an example from a family member of mine. In fact, my mother, she is a cleaner in a school, and it just so materialised that the union found out that female cleaning staff. So these people at the bottom of the hierarchy, the female cleaning staff were paid 20% less than their male equivalents doing exactly the same job. So it's not just about people in these huge government organizations, which of course are going to make the news, but people at the bottom end of the ladder.
Exactly.
And that's where the social injustice really is, the bottom end of the ladder, whereby men are being paid considerably more than women. However, the unions did fight for my mother in the union. And I have to sort of take my hat off to the union in this respect, showing my true colours, in the sense that they did push through and then they got back pay for 10 years.
Excellent.
The difference between the amounts that men were getting and the amount less that women were getting. So she eventually got that money back, and there was then equality, much more equality in the system. But it took them a long time, but the unions did step in and they did do something about it.
Mind you, if we're talking about equality, let's have a look at the equality regarding the British state pension, because there's a lot of comments at the moment about women being badly off under the new structure and later retirement age, and yet for years and years, decades, men had to work an extra 5 years. They had to retire at 65 to get a state pension, and women retired at 60 and got theirs.
But does the math balance out? Does the math balance out? When you, I don't know, I'm asking. When you look at over the lifetime, their income versus over the, when I say lifetime, I mean the working age lifetime. Does the math balance out?
Well, the national insurance payments, which go towards this, I mean, as far as I know, they were equal.
They were equal. Yeah. I don't know. I think it's a distasteful and pervasive culture, and when even the government is in on this culture, and from the lowest to the highest, they're in on this culture of men get paid. This is something too pervasive to ignore. And I think it needs to be addressed, and I think it needs to be more of a headliner. Honestly, I do.
Going back to the BBC again, and about the women's pay, in the BBC, they have a pay structure for their staff. They always have had that. And when I was with them, they had a very defined structure. But now it seems that with the presenters and the well-known names on screen, they're not part of that grading system. That they have agents, and the agent go in.
The agents negotiate.
So the question is, perhaps the women don't have. They ought to change their agents.
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, if I might interject, the situation in Germany here, it's interesting. They recently, there was been several studies done, and this came up recently that they said there is inequality between men and women as far as pay levels go. And then a couple days ago, I heard that it's very regional, though. It is not true that everywhere that women are at a disadvantage to men. It's a regional thing. And the other thing is that women are now allowed or can now claim the right to ask their employers what someone who does the same job as they do in the company, what they make. But they don't just get this information. They don't just say, well, he makes us this and much. And so they can't do a direct comparison. The employer can then say, well, let's see, we have Joe and Frank, and they do about the same job. And if they say it's approximately the same as what you make or something like that. So on the one hand, it's like they're presenting the woman with this chance to do this, but in reality,
they don't give her the
she doesn't get enough real information to really go to court. So it's almost impossible to do that.
And a lot of contracts have that clause in that says you're not supposed to discuss your income with someone else.
Yeah,
which is
people do that.
That's a very persuasive thing. In fact, there's certainly in countries like America, there's this sort of perception that you are not allowed to talk about your income or your salary as if it's breaking some kind of law, and yet that's absolutely not true.
No, people do talk about that, and I mean, otherwise people wouldn't know that there's inequality of pay.
Well, exactly. But I mean, the suspicion is that employers will sort of create this kind of culture where people say, oh, no, you mustn't talk about wages or salaries in order to hide the fact that they're not paying.
They aren't paying.
That they aren't paying equally. Yeah.
Well, that was the idea of this new rule that that women could ask, what is their color? But in the end, it's so complicated that they can't really get any real information.
What I found out recently, actually, from my husband, he's a project manager, and he has spent 20 years. Part of his job was negotiating big contracts for the power industry, within the power industry. And talking to him about a project I was undertaking, he said there's a difference between the law of the country and contract law. Because in a contract, technically speaking, the person who prepares a contract, they can put anything in the contract. It is up to the person signing it to decide if they're going to agree to these conditions or not. And actually, even if it is blatantly ridiculous, if you sign and you accept this condition, there is, and you break that condition of chatting, there is support for the other side saying, well, you breached the contract we had with you when you discussed your salary with XYZ, and they can take it to court. Now, how far it will get when it actually does go before the court, which is now the state, is different. But if they put enough pressure on you, or they really want to nitpick, they can say you breached a contract. So the rule here is, if they put that in a contract and it's not state law that you have to abide by it, you, the person signing the contract, could challenge it and go, yeah, you need to take that out.
Yeah.
Theoretically, you can challenge it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, certainly the case in Germany, there are certain types of clauses that you cannot put in a contract.
Yeah.
And if it does go in a contract, a court can simply say, well, it's invalid.
Yeah.
It's also hiding things in the small print.
In the fine print,
And stuff like that. The German court will say, well, no sensible person would have been able to find that information, therefore it can't be enforced.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that in Britain there was a strong tradition of unions, and yet the unions didn't really address that issue very closely.
You
Maybe
kind
they're
of
run by
wondered.
men.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the bottom line.
A lot of the time, I mean, because if you're talking about the traditional manufacturing industries, it was mostly men anyway. I mean, there was a thing about if you know about the Bristol bus boycott. This was about this was about the fact that in Bristol, black people were not allowed to drive buses, and there was a huge public boycott about this. But the unions came out on the side of the employers, because they feared that if blacks were allowed to drive buses, the white bus drivers would lose their jobs.
Yeah.
When I mentioned the unions, though, I wasn't suggesting the unions haven't done anything. They have. They've played a really big part. But you would have thought that these sort of issues would have been long gone.
Yeah, it wouldn't be an issue anymore.
Yeah.
Nowadays,
That's what I'm
but
getting
it
at.
is,
Yeah. And I think Scott, you may have hit it on the head. Traditionally, power, leadership, heads of companies and so on have traditionally been men. And then women, unfortunately, have this biological issue where you get pregnant and you have to leave and you have to breastfeed and rear your child. And there was this culture of thinking, I invest all this money in you, and then you take
leave.
off for a year because you have the effrontery to have my child.
Right. Right. Well, that
and have my son.
Yeah. I have talked to people, owners of companies, and that's one of the things they say. I said, well, why don't you have more women in here? And they said, they get pregnant.
Yeah,
and
with their children.
Right.
With their children.
Right.
With their sons,
Yeah.
who then grow up and look at humans, the same gender as their mother, and go, yeah, you don't deserve as much as I, which is as I do, which I think is totally ironic.
It's ludicrous. Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Would it help then if we also had mandatory paternity leave, the same as maternity leave?
That's
So
I think
then,
men should get that.
I was about to say that. In fact, Andrew, as you said that, my thoughts were immediately channeled towards the Fathers for Justice, which is a campaign in the UK. You don't hear too much about it now, but you did in the 90s and the early 2000s with regards to men having those rights. It was in the context of adoption, but also I think it played out with regards to paternity. And if men could have the same time off as women, then the argument wouldn't even exist, well, they get pregnant, because a man would then take off the same amount of time as a woman would take off, and then you would have equality in the workplace, which might sort of distinguish that or extinguish that argument completely.
I also think that men, during labor, when the woman goes into labor, I also think men should be made to experience the same cramps. This is just just to keep
Didn't they do
things
that once?
really
Didn't
bad.
they have an
Full on
experiment
this,
where they
yeah.
sort of attached
they did.
electrodes to a man
they
and
did.
sort of stimulated
It's a
the
YouTube
pain
video.
of childbirth and
Yeah.
nearly passed out or
Yeah,
something?
it was 3 of them, and it was ridiculous to watch. It was hilarious. 2 of them, 1 of them lasted, and I think 2 of them go, "Oh no, we can't do this."
Well, it's been lively conversation. I think we could probably go on a lot longer on some of these issues.
However,
However, Well, don't forget that we're back again on March the 25th.
what
There's
happened, Barry?
It's just finger.
He's so excited.
It's
Push the
finger
button,
trouble.
Barry.
Oh, okay.
I just want a quick word about what's going to be in March. We'll be looking at the post-war role of the British Army and the Air Force in Germany, and they're set to finally leave the country next year. And also leaving will be the military's very own radio and television service, BFBS, that's entertained and informed service people in Germany for decades. We hope to take a look at their work too. And also, as I mentioned earlier, Brexit, the fears expats have about their rights. Will they keep them? What might they lose? That's in the March show. So until then, it's goodbye from Alicia Banfield, Scott Hazlitt, John Goodyear and Andrew Bossum, and from myself, Barry Redfern. Until March the 25th. Goodbye.